picture this, if you will. It's 1983, a sweltering summer night in Hartford, Connecticut.
Oh, I can practically feel the humidity already.
You've got fireflies twinkling in the darkness, and 18-year-old Linda Lulu Caesar is making her way through a park.
Sounds peaceful enough.
But she never makes it home.
Oh, no.
Instead, she becomes another chilling statistic. One of countless black women, especially during the 80s and 90s, whose murders went unsolved. And today we're going to dive deep into Lulu's story, a case that's been shrouded in mystery for over 40 years.
It's truly heartbreaking how many families are left searching for answers, especially when it involves marginalized communities. Lulu's story is sadly not unique. But maybe, just maybe, by understanding the details, we can shed some light on this darkness and keep her memory alive.
Exactly. And we're basing this deep dive on an episode of the true crime podcast, The Deck.
Okay.
They did a fantastic job weaving together police reports and interviews with the lead detective to really lay out the facts of the case.
It's always so fascinating to hear those firsthand accounts, especially from the detective who is there on the ground, facing all the challenges of the investigation firsthand. It really gives us a glimpse into how things were handled back then without all the advanced technology we have today.
Right. And those limitations become even more apparent when you think about the setting of Lulu's murder. Keeney Park. The Deck describes it as like this idyllic place during the day with rolling hills and a golf course. But at night, it transformed into something else entirely dark, secluded, almost like the perfect place to disappear.
It's chilling how a seemingly safe, innocent space can become so vulnerable under the cover of darkness. It makes you think about how danger can lurk in the most unexpected places. And tragically, this wasn't the first time Keeney Park had witnessed violence against a woman. Just a year earlier, Sylvia Baker was found murdered there, strangled to death.
That detail gives me goosebumps. 2 murders in the same park, both young women. It makes you wonder, was there a pattern? Was there a predator targeting women in Hartford at that time?
That's exactly the question investigators were wrestling with. Was this a coincidence, or was there something more sinister at play? A question that still lingers, even decades later.
And it all began on July 13th, 1983. 2 bikers are riding through Keeney Park in the early morning hours, and they stumble across a horrifying scene.
Oh, no.
Lulu's body. She'd been brutally stabbed multiple times, left for dead.
Can you imagine the shock of coming across that? It's a stark reminder that violence can erupt anywhere, shattering lives in an instant. And what's even more disturbing, Lulu was still alive when they found her, but sadly, she died shortly after.
That just adds another layer of heartbreak to this story. Right from the start, the investigation was an uphill battle. Police had almost no physical evidence at the scene, and they didn't even know who she was.
Imagine the challenges those detectives faced. No DNA testing, limited resources. They were trying to piece together a puzzle with so many missing pieces. It's really a testament to their dedication that they were able to eventually identify Lulu and start to unravel her life.
Absolutely. Through painstaking work, they discovered she was 18 years old, lived just a few miles from the park, and was known to stay out late. Sources suggest she might have been involved in sex work, which, adds another layer of complexity to this already tragic story.
You have to consider the social context of the time. Being involved in sex work may have increased Lulu's vulnerability and, sadly, could have even influenced how her case was perceived and investigated.
It's a heartbreaking reality that we see all too often in cases like this. And the autopsy revealed some crucial information. Lulu had been stabbed 16 times, but there was no evidence of sexual assault.
16 times! That's brutal. But the lack of sexual assault does shift the focus. It suggests that maybe the motive was something else entirely, something personal perhaps, driven by rage or revenge.
And here's another point the medical examiner highlighted. The stab wound to Lulu's heart would have caused a very rapid death. Remember, she was still clinging to life when those bikers found her, meaning the attack happened very shortly before they arrived.
That narrows down the time frame considerably. Makes you wonder if those bikers were just minutes behind Lulu's killer. Chilling. Now, in the early stages of the investigation, the police received a couple of tips. One named a man named Eric as the murderer. Another mentioned a fight that Lulu had with a man named Michael at a bar.
It sounds like they had some solid leads right from the start.
These tips seemed promising at first, but like so many leads in cold cases, they ultimately led nowhere. Dead ends.
Frustrating.
It's a common frustration. You sift through all the noise, the rumors, the whispers, trying to find that needle in a haystack that leads to the truth. But then the case takes an unexpected turn. A man named Robert Graham, a known sex offender recently released from prison, contacts the police claiming to know who killed Lulu.
Wait, hold on. A convicted sex offender inserts himself into a murder investigation. Talk about a red flag.
It certainly raises eyebrows, and his story adds another layer to the intrigue. He claims he saw Lulu being chased and abducted by a couple she owed money to,
Oh, wow.
and later learned from the woman involved that she had, in fact, killed Lulu. It sounds like something straight out of a movie, doesn't it?
It does. But I'm guessing the police weren't totally convinced.
You're right, they were skeptical. Robert's criminal past and some inconsistencies in his story made them doubt his claims. However, one detail does give you pause. Robert accurately described Lulu's clothing, which was information that wasn't publicly known.
A lucky guess? Or did Robert actually see Lulu that night?
That's the question. And the mystery deepens with another discovery 5 days after the murder. A knife tip found at the crime scene. This detail, crucially, was kept secret by the police.
A knife tip. Now, that's tangible evidence, a direct link to the murder weapon. But finding it days later raises questions about how thorough that initial investigation was.
Exactly. Was it overlooked? Planted? It casts a shadow of doubt over everything.
And that shadow only grows when, 2 years later, a new witness comes forward. A woman named Shirley, claiming to have been friends with Lulu, reports a different crime and drops a bombshell. She was with Robert Graham the night of the murder and places him at the scene.
Hold on. So, we have a witness who connects our prime suspect to the crime scene. Could this be the break they've been waiting for?
Possibly, but there's a catch.
Let me guess. There's more to Shirley's story.
Oh, there's always more. But we'll delve into that after a quick break. Okay, so we're back, and I have to admit I'm still trying to wrap my head around this whole witness situation. She places Robert at the crime scene, but knows about the knife tip. How is that even possible?
It's the detail that really makes you question everything, right? If Shirley wasn't involved in the murder itself, then how did she know about the broken knife tip? That information was never released to the public.
It's like a giant question mark hanging over her entire testimony. Is she a reliable witness? Is she intentionally misleading the investigation? Or could she be trying to protect someone, maybe even herself?
It's certainly possible, and that's where things get really complicated. Memory, especially when tied to trauma, can be a tricky thing. It's not always a perfect recording of events. It's malleable, susceptible to suggestion, and influenced by emotions like fear or guilt.
So even if Shirley believes she's telling the truth, her memories could be distorted, or she might be subconsciously filling in gaps with what she thinks happened, rather than what she actually saw.
Right, and then you have to consider the potential pressures she might have been facing at the time. Was she afraid of Robert? Was she pressured by someone else to change her story? Was she trying to downplay her own involvement? There are so many layers to unpack.
And unfortunately, those layers might be impossible to fully unravel,
Yeah.
especially after all this time.
It's one of the biggest challenges in cold cases like this, trying to reconstruct the past based on fragmented memories, conflicting accounts, and evidence that may have deteriorated over time. It's like trying to solve a puzzle where some of the pieces are missing and others have faded beyond recognition.
It makes you realize how much we rely on accurate and consistent information to seek justice.
Absolutely. But even when those pieces are missing or unreliable, it doesn't mean the search for truth ends. It just becomes more complex, more nuanced.
And in Lulu's case, the complexities just keep multiplying. Remember how Shirley initially said she wasn't at the scene of the murder, just in the car with Robert and Lulu earlier that night? Well, later she changed her story.
Oh, this is where it gets interesting.
Yeah, suddenly she's placing herself at the scene, claiming she actually witnessed Robert killing Lulu after Lulu took some money from him and ran.
It's a dramatic shift. Makes you wonder what prompted that change. Was it a genuine recollection of a previously suppressed memory? Was she pressured by someone to alter her account? Or was she trying to minimize her own potential involvement?
We can speculate all day, but the bottom line is those inconsistencies created enough reasonable doubt that the charges against Robert were eventually dropped.
It happens more often than you'd think in these cases. The legal system demands a high burden of proof. And with a witness whose story keeps shifting and evidence that's, let's be honest, from another era, it's incredibly difficult to secure a conviction.
It's heartbreaking for everyone involved, especially for Lulu's family, who are still searching for answers after all these years. And while Robert might not have been convicted for Lulu's murder, his story takes another dark turn.
Uh-oh. What happened?
Well, after Lulu's murder, he was arrested and convicted for multiple violent crimes against women. He served a 15-year sentence for assault, and then in 2015, he received a life sentence for another murder.
Wow. It's a chilling escalation of violence. It paints a very disturbing picture of Robert's character and makes you wonder if Lulu's murder was just one piece of a much larger, much darker puzzle.
It's a disturbing thought, but hard to ignore given his history. And sadly, we'll never be able to question him directly about Lulu's case because he died in prison in 2021 while serving that life sentence.
Another dead end in a case already full of them. But it doesn't mean all hope is lost. Years later, a new detective, Detective Jacobson, takes on Lulu's case, determined to bring some resolution. He decides to re-examine the evidence, hoping that modern DNA technology might provide the key to unlock the truth.
It's amazing to think how much forensic science has advanced since 1983. Back then, DNA testing was still in its infancy. Now it's become a crucial tool for solving cold cases.
Absolutely. Testing items like Lulu's fingernail clippings or her clothing could potentially reveal a DNA match to Robert, finally linking him definitively to the crime.
It seemed like the breakthrough everyone was hoping for, but the results delivered another shocking twist.
Oh, what happened?
Instead of finding Robert's DNA, they discovered a female DNA profile, most likely Lulu's own.
Wait, so they didn't find any trace of Robert on the evidence?
Not a single trace. And that's where we'll pick up after a quick break. So no Robert, no other suspects. Back to square one, it seems.
Well, not entirely. Remember, the absence of Robert's DNA doesn't automatically mean he wasn't involved. We're talking about evidence that's over 4 decades old. DNA degrades, especially on items exposed to the elements like clothing left at an outdoor crime scene.
So are we back to that whole absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence idea?
Exactly. It's frustrating, but we have to be realistic about the limitations of forensic science, especially with older cases. It doesn't erase the possibility of his involvement, especially given his violent history. It just means we can't definitively prove it with DNA.
It's a tough pill to swallow, not just for us trying to make sense of this case, but even more so for Lulu's family. They may never have a clear answer about who took her from them.
It underscores the tragedy of unsolved cases, the lack of closure, the lingering questions that haunt families for years, even decades. It's why it's so important to keep these stories alive, to keep searching for answers, no matter how much time has passed.
And that's where our listeners come in. Even the smallest detail, something that might seem insignificant now, could be the missing piece that cracks this case wide open. Maybe you knew Lulu, maybe you remember hearing rumors back then, or maybe you simply lived in the Hartford area in 1983.
Don't underestimate the power of your memories. What you recall could be crucial. If anything at all comes to mind, anything that might be connected to Lulu Caesar, please contact the Hartford Police Department.
You can reach their Major Crimes Division at 860-757-4000. And if you prefer to remain anonymous, you can call their tip line at 860-722-TFPS.
We'll also make sure to include an email address for tips in our show notes for those who prefer to reach out that way. Any bit of information could help.
Absolutely. And while we wait for those answers, while we grapple with the unknowns of this case, I think it's worth stepping back for a moment to consider the broader context. Lulu's story is sadly not unique. It reflects a disturbing pattern that emerged during that time period, a disproportionate number of unsolved murders involving Black women, particularly in the 80s and 90s.
It's a point that the Deck podcast brings up, and rightfully so. These cases often didn't receive the same level of attention, resources, or media coverage as other cases. It's a painful reality that we can't ignore.
It speaks to deeper societal issues, systemic biases that have long plagued our justice system. It's a stark reminder that we have a lot of work to do to ensure that every life, every case, receives the attention and resources it deserves, regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic background.
It's about demanding justice for all, not just for some, and that's a fight that requires ongoing awareness, education, and advocacy.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to bring this deep dive to a close. It's been a heavy one, filled with twists, turns, and tragically more questions than answers. But I hope that by exploring these complexities, by shedding light on the human stories behind the headlines, we've sparked some important conversations.
I agree. Cases like Lulu's challenge us to think critically, to question assumptions, to confront uncomfortable truths about our society, and ultimately, to recognize that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing process that requires collective effort.
It's a process that we can all be a part of. So to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. Thank you for your willingness to engage with these difficult topics and for your commitment to seeking truth and understanding.
We hope you'll continue to join us for future deep dives as we explore the complexities of human experience and uncover the hidden stories that shape our world. And if you're looking for more thought-provoking content, be sure to subscribe to our podcast for new episodes and updates.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and never stop asking questions.